greenhouse at Salisbury University. We're here with Ginny Rosenkrantz from the University of Maryland Extension. Today we're doing a live Q&A. Send in your plant questions, any kind of questions you have, amateur gardeners, master gardeners, and all the sorts. Ginny?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, well, it's always fun to be able to talk to anybody who wants to talk about plants, because I mean, I can sit for hours, and we might be here for hours, if you guys call and ask me questions. Somebody was saying, does this mean we get to stump Ginny? I said, well, you know, you never know. If you don't ask, you never know if I know the answer or not. So that would be kind of fun too. That would be easy. Can you ask me a question about plants that I don't know? But anyways, I love being here in a greenhouse because it doesn't matter what the temperature is, what the weather is. This is a delightful place to be. If you think it's a little bit hot, you stand in front of a fan like I am and you cool off instantly. We have beautiful plants here. Now, one thing I think is always so cool about Salisbury University is they design their plants with different themes, but there's always one specific theme that goes through the whole way, and that is the colors of Salisbury University. So as we're looking through here, you can go ahead and sort of see what they have. Like right here, this is just one plant, and it kind of has all the different colors that you need for Salisbury University. It has the maroon, and it has the gold, and it has some green in it too, which is, you know, sort of a backgroundish thing. But I mean, the colors of maroon and gold are so beautiful, and they put them together with so many different plant ideas, which is so much fun. So I love these tropicals. These are ones you can keep in your house if you have a patio in the summertime, and it gets like morning sun and afternoon shade. This is absolutely perfect because they can be watered and be outside enjoying the morning sunlight without getting burned by the hot afternoon sun, and give your garden so much color. Well, the nice thing about these also is they're pretty easy to take care of because they're tropicals. They have very thick waxy leaves, so they're very sturdy, and they can handle a little bit of wind, and they can handle a little bit of drought, but they'll let you know when it's too dry. And so all you have to do is make sure you water them, you know, probably on a daily basis in the summertime. When they're in your house, like I have one of these in my house, and I only water it once a week. And that's good too, because plants do need to dry out sometimes in between so that they're not sitting in soppy wet water. Now there are some plants that like that, so we can kind of go through those also. But I do like these. Now here's another one that's very, very similar. The foliage is a little different. I think this is really, really cool. Oh my, this has got some really cool little critters on it, so we're gonna go ahead and leave this here for the time being. But whenever you're looking at plants to buy, you do want to look at the leaves on the top and also the leaves on the underside to see if you find anything. And you don't want to bring home any hitchhikers because they can jump to other plants. They have more plants back here. This is a really pretty one too. This is almost like a corn plant where you can have it goes up like this. Most of the time they're in a more of a green, dark green color, but remember, Salisbury University colors are the darker maroon colors, and so that's what this kind of pulls up. It has a little bit of the gold on it, but a lot of the dark, beautiful dark maroon color, and this is absolutely spectacular. The older growth has more of the different colors into the foliage, which is really nice. So that means that as the new foliage comes out and is sort of a purpley color, probably as it matures, it too will go ahead and get some more of the really cool colors. Here they have, this is a type of Cucarella or Tiarella, and this loves moist soil, and it loves shade, which is why they have it in the shade part of the greenhouse here too. But what makes this really cool is look at the leaves on this. Isn't that gorgeous? The veins are all a dark, dark purple. Again, keeping with the theme, of course. But also what's really nice about this only blooms once in the springtime. And when it blooms, it has a little teeny white spike that comes out, and it's covered with little teeny flowers. It looks a little bit like a brush that you could go ahead and clean out bottles or something like that. So I call it the bottle brush plant. They also call it a mist plant because it looks like it's a bunch of mist flowing over the plant. And it blooms for about 2 weeks, and that's it. So having the foliage, this gorgeous color, actually extends the beauty of this plant. So as soon as it comes up in the springtime, all through the summer and into the fall, this is a really cool plant to have. whether it's in bloom or not. And also, this is a very tactical one. So if you guys are gardeners and you like to pet plants, like I always like to see, what does it feel like when you're doing it? And I like to smell plants too. This one has a very soft, fuzzy feel to it. So it's not like lamb's ear, though, which is really, really petable, but it's very, very nice. What that also says to me is that that's kind of nature's way to have a little bit of sunscreen. This is a shade-loving plant, and it does prefer to have shade, but if it gets a little bit too much sun in the morning or in the late afternoon, the little hairs on this will protect it a little bit, just a little bit. So that's pretty cool. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move around just right in front here. The neat thing about these greenhouse is that all of these trays that these are on are actually movable. So I can go ahead and push them together or open them up as I want to share things with you guys. So this is one of my favorite spring plants. And actually this is one, it's an annual here on the Eastern Shore. I think down in Florida it might be more of a perennial. It's called heliotrope. And sometimes people call it the cherry pie or the vanilla plant. And when you smell it, you know why. That little flower is very, very pretty. It's kind of a dark purple, and the foliage is very, very nice too. But when this sucker is in bloom, oh my goodness, she smells so sweet. And so this is a nice plant to put in through containers, or this could probably be like a ground cover. I'm not sure where they're going to put it, but wherever it will be absolutely spectacular. And this will be really nice basically all through the summer. It will bloom and give you color all through the summer. So that's kind of a fun thing.
I have a question for you when you're done.
Oh, all right, go for it. What is the question?
Nick Haglish, he said, Miss Rosencrantz, as being in rock and roll, length of 12 years, and a central office for 11, I got plants from the land trust yesterday. I decided to go for the more groovy rock and roll lounge. How often do you water indoor apartment plants?
Okay, so indoor apartment plants. Again, I only water maybe, once a week because, in an apartment, you have, you know how much light you have and that sort of thing, but you want to go ahead and make sure that your plants are getting the amount of light they need. A lot of apartment plants don't need an awful lot of light. Like for instance, where I am right now, this is all covered by shade cloth, so all the tropicals are here too because they cannot handle a lot of light. But if you wanted to go ahead and to figure out exactly how much you should have, you want to go ahead and water them. Okay, pour some water on and collect it all at the bottom. And if you want to be scientific about it, measure it. Just go ahead and take like, oh, I've got 2 cups of water. I'll go ahead and pour 2 cups of water. And then in 15 minutes, see how much water came out in the tray underneath. And then take the plant off the tray and then take the water in the tray and put it back in the measuring cup to see how much you have. That will give you a really good idea of how much water that plant really needed, because you have 2 cups. And what if you put 1 cup back? Well, you really only needed 1 cup of water to water with, which is kind of fun. The other thing you want to do is you want to make sure before you water it next week, you want to dig down with your finger at least a ½ an inch to an inch to see, and yes, you have to wash your fingers afterwards, but if you dig down into the soil, like I'm doing with this thing right now, you can see how wet it is or how dry it is. Now I know that this was just recently watered because in greenhouses they water every morning, but that's because they're out in full sun or shade, sun covered by the shade. And most house plants are not full sun like that. But usually, like I said, I like to wait a full week before I water again. So I'm glad you went to the Lower Shore Land Trust. They have beautiful native plants from a really, really good nursery. And I too was there and I got a whole bunch, so I can hardly wait to plant them. So I'm here instead. I hope you're having fun planting.
All right, I have a few more questions.
All right. Thank you guys for calling in.
So, how do I start choosing which plant to buy?
I'm sorry, say it again.
How do I start choosing which plant to buy?
Oh, wow. Okay, if this is an outdoor plant, the first thing you have to look out is, do you have a sunny spot or do you have a shady spot? If you're in a shady spot, then you want to make sure that you look for plants that can go ahead and handle shade either in the morning or especially in the afternoon. Like for instance, I love hostas because they're great shade plants. And they have beautiful flowers that smell fabulous when they bloom. That's why one of the common names of them is a lily plant, even though it's not a lily. But anyways, the hostas basically really, really do well with a little bit of morning sun, and definitely the afternoon shade. So if you have a full sun area, like no shade trees anywhere, then you want to look for plants that can handle full sun. And that would be things like daylilies outside. I would say if you're going to go with native plants, I like the purple coneflower. I love the Indian blanket flower. There's beautiful things like that. If you have really moist soil, go for Joe Pye weed because they like moist soil. The Asclepias or the butterfly weed, that likes hot and dry. So if you have really sandy soil, that's a great one to plant. And it blooms pretty much throughout the summer. Now, don't be afraid if the caterpillars actually eat that plant down to the ground. The first time I planted it, I had a whole bunch of monarchs that were like, she brought a monarch plant, yay team. And the monarch plants have to lay their eggs on the milkweed plant. So here's the monarch butterfly. She planted a whole bunch of eggs on the butterfly plant because that's what the babies eat. So the eggs hatched out to caterpillars, and the caterpillars ate the plant down to the ground. And I was like, well, that's the end of that plant. Oh, no, these are perennials. More foliage came out, more flowers came out, and then more butterflies came by, and more eggs were laid, and more caterpillars chewed it down. So this is how it happens in my garden. But now I've gotten smart, and I have like 6 plants. I just bought 3 more of the butterfly plants, the Asclepias tuberosa. So bring on the monarchs. My garden's ready. You have another question? Yes.
All right. Janet Veeder says, my mom used to put coffee grounds on plants, including tomato plants. Is this beneficial? If so, what type of plants?
Okay, coffee grounds are excellent to add to compost. People like to put it on the soil too. And what it does, the reason why it's so good is that the compost, as things compost down, they break down into all the nutrients that plants need. But coffee grounds are great because they're already small pieces. If I take like a whole leaf or a whole plant and I throw it in the compost, it takes a while to break it down. So if it's already as a coffee ground, oh, it's ready to roll in that sense, which I think is really cool. Anything that you can go ahead and use to put in a compost pile or a compost tumbler that's already in small pieces, it will compost down quicker. So when you say what kind of plants should you do that to? Any kind of plants. Now I do know that there has been some research done to see if caffeine will keep away slugs and snails. They're still doing the research. I haven't heard the results. They're probably still up late at night drinking coffee and talking to Mile a Minute. So I don't know. But no, anytime you can add compost to your plants, whether you have sandy soil or clay soil, all you're doing is you're helping the plant. Compost is a slow release fertilizer, and it's really a good thing for anything. Do you have another question?
Sure.
Aha.
All right. What is the difference between bright, medium, and low light plants?
Oh, that's a good question. Bright, medium, or low light plants. Okay, so bright sunlight would be like being outside. So if you have an indoor house plant that needs bright sunshine, you need to have it right in the window. It has to be in the window, not on the east, but on the south and the west, not on the north. So bright would be right in the window, south and west. Now medium, well, that means it needs to have bright light, but not right in the sunshine. It's not going to be out there sunbathing. So you could go ahead and have an east window or a south and west. But if it's south and west, you want to have the plant back from the window itself. So instead of being right here in front of the window, take it back about 5-10 feet so that it can get the light, but not right on it, if that makes sense. And then indirect light, well, I would use like a north window because that gives you bright light, but indirect, so nothing's really on it, and that will really work really well. Okay, any other questions?
Which indoor plants are the easiest to care for?
Oh my heavens, I love that question. The easiest plants to care for. Well, to me, the easiest plants to care for are things like the pothos and the philodendron. Those are the ones that I first started working with when I was a little girl. My mom said, you can take care of these plants. I was like, yes, I can take care of my own plants. And then I was like, what do I have to do? She goes, water them once a week and then check to see if they look happy. And so that's why people actually pick up plants and they talk to their plants because they're checking them out to see how they look. When you're looking at plants, you always want to look underneath the leaves, Like these are really, really healthy leaves. See how pretty they are? And on top of the leaves, you want to look in the soil. Sometimes you want to actually check the roots. I'm not going to do that with these guys. I know that they're probably well rooted, but I'm not going to do that with these. I'll choose another plant to do that with. But all of those things you can do to check the health of the plant, just like you would do about if you had a small child. You know, you want to say, how are you feeling? If they can't talk, you have to do that sort of thing. Excellent questions. Thank you guys for all these awesome questions.
All right. We only have fluorescent light in our office. Which plants should I buy?
Oh, see, fluorescent light can be almost like a grow light in a sense. It depends on what the color range is, but almost all the tropicals will do really, really well. So I would stay with things like, you know, the pothos, the philodendrons, but you can also go with something, if you have room for something like that, you can go with a croton. There's a lot of beautiful things. The dracaenas come in delicate ones like the red lined dracaena or the tricolored dracaena. But then there's also some that are like a corn plant, which has got really, really dark, wide green leaves. That can get tall. I have a friend that has a corn plant, and she has a 2-story atrium, and that corn plant is 2 stories high. And it keeps on growing. So she has to get on a ladder every now and then and creatively trim it back. It's fine, it's fine. So any type of plant that is a tropical plant that is used to growing under the shade of a tree should do fine. Even African violets would do really, really well in my opinion. Jade plants would probably do okay. I mean, you know, if it's in the tropical section, just give it a shot.
Nick Haglund asks,
Another question.
how can you take good care of a bonsai tree?
Oh, bonsai. Okay, bonsai is when you jump out of an airplane, hopefully with a parachute. Bonsai is the art of taking a plant, and it can be any plant. I'm going to keep picking up this plant because it smells so good, but any kind of plant. And what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and put it in a container that's very shallow. So you are actually controlling the height and the growth of the plant by keeping the roots short. So every 2 to 3 years, you're going to want to go ahead and take the plant out of the pot and carefully trim 1/3 of the roots, only 1/3, okay? So you might trim a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here this year, and then 2 years later, here, here, and here. So you're moving it around. What you're doing is you're promoting new root growth, and new root growth always is very important so that the plant will go ahead and be very healthy. Bonsai means a healthy living plant, just in miniature. When you think about it, in Japan, people live very, very close to each other. They have small apartments. They don't have large houses like we have because they don't have the land. And that means that they cannot go outside in the country and look at these big, beautiful trees that we have. So what they do is they create their own miniature gardens. So these are, for the most part, outdoor plants. Like for instance, I'm going to choose a beautiful plant that I love, a Japanese cutleaf maple. They are spectacular. Maples are very fast growing, but the Japanese cutleaf maple is very delicate and very lightweight, so you could go ahead and work with that. So what you'd want to do is start when it's very tiny, like a little seedling, and you would want to go ahead and keep it small by keeping the roots small. The other thing you'd want to do is keep the top so that it's also to a certain height. And sometimes people will actually go ahead and remove the first set of leaves after they've fully expanded and take 1/3 of them off so that the second set of leaves, which are smaller, will grow. And that'll be kind of cool too because it does keep it small. You can go ahead and create them so that they're in a weeping form or a windswept form. There's all kinds of things you can do with them. And when you look at it like that, you just go, wow, I can picture that plant. If you want to see a really, really good collection, the U.S. Arboretum in DC, oh my gosh, they have got a beautiful, beautiful collection. So it's always worthwhile. I think I have another question.
Yeah. Rick Feeder says, last year we grew cucumbers in our raised bed and they were all extremely bitter. What can we do differently this year?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I would do a soil test. If they were bitter, that sounds like he might have gone ahead, your soil might have been maybe too acidic. So even though you're using a raised bed and you're adding new compost every year, it's still a good idea to go ahead and get a soil test. So if you live in Salisbury, there are a couple of places that will go ahead and allow you to bring soil in. But raised bed soil with a lot of compost is different than just gardens, just being in the garden. So you might want to look into that and go ahead and send a sample off. But what I would do is I would go ahead, especially if you're doing cucumbers and tomatoes, add a little bit of garden lime, agriculture lime, into the soil and work it into the soil. And I think that that will probably be a big help. Bitter plants means that it's probably too acidic. Good question. Hopefully this year your cucumbers will be better. Oh, another trick, especially on raised beds, put like a trellis and grow the cucumbers up the trellis. So when the fruit is formed, it grows down, so it never rots on the ground, and it's always straight. Cool. Another question. Look at her. She's got all the questions. I might have a few answers.
All right. So there's a couple leaves questions. So
Okay.
Why do leaves turn yellow? Why are my leaves rotting? Why do you get the brown crispy leaves?
Oh, right. Are we talking indoor or outdoor? We don't know. But okay, we'll just go with yellow. Okay, I'm picking this plant again because it's right here and I can smell it. It's so delicious. So if I have a plant like this and the leaves start to turn yellow, my first question is this too dry or is it too wet? And that's one of the things you do have to ask yourself, because if it's too dry, obviously you water it. If it's too wet, you have to let it dry out before you water it again. Now, indoor plants have to deal with air conditioning in the summer and heat in the winter. So you're always dealing with a certain amount of air, and the air is usually dry. Air conditioning pulls the moisture out of the air, and heat obviously pulls the moisture out of the air. So if the leaves are burnt around the edges, that is a classic symptom of the air is too dry. Now, one way you can fix it is you can go ahead and have your plant on a tray and have the tray filled with like little pebbles or pretty marbles or pretty glass, beads or whatever. And then you put your plant on it, and then you have the tray full of water, and that would be good too. That would keep moisture there. But the other way to do it, which I find much more fun, is I put my plants together. So I kind of group them together so that they look like friends having a chit chat, maybe a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And as the plants grow and are close together, they're sharing the moisture. So one thing about plants is every time you water them, they pull up water through the roots, right? But this is basic physics. The only way it can really work effectively is that on the underside of every leaf, there are little holes called stomites, and they leak water. So plants are always leaking water, or leaves are always leaky. Because of that, that means there's always moisture in the air. Let me give you a reason why that. If you're standing in the full sun on a parking lot, and it's a blacktop parking lot, and it's 100 degrees, I bet it feels like more like 130 degrees, right? You go in that same parking lot, but put a shade over top of it, like a tent or something, whew, you're in the shade. It's so much cooler. Life is better. But if you take a step over to a tree that's right beside the parking lot, same heat, same parking lot, but the tree is there shading it and you're under the shade of the tree, it's going to feel even cooler because that tree is always releasing moisture from those leaves. And as the moisture leaves the leaves and it evaporates, it cools the temperature, which is why it's always cooler under the shade of a tree. So keeping that in mind, keep your plants kind of close together, or if you can't do that, or if you have like a special plant and you're concerned about that, go ahead and put like a tray and put the gravel or the pebbles or the decorative stones, and then add a little bit of water so that there's always moisture around, but the plants are not sitting in water. Okay, another question?
Yeah, my mom has a question. She asked me before we started, she has a garden in her backyard and she wanted to know if she could use the same soil as last year.
Okay, if you have a garden and you would like to have, thank you.
All the way back?
All the way back. All right. If you have a garden and you have it, it's the same garden as you've always used, you don't really have to add any compost to it, but I think you should. You should always test it for lime, especially if you're going to be growing tomatoes. Tomatoes need a lot of calcium. Tomatoes are actually nitrogen hogs, calcium hogs, that kind of stuff. And they're wonderful plants, but if you don't have enough calcium and you're growing tomatoes, you will actually have a problem. It looks like a disease, but it's called blossom end rot. And that's because there's not enough calcium. How do you get calcium? Lime, agricultural lime is made from calcium and magnesium. So just adding the lime and working it into the soil. It's off?
There's a picture on the screen, so you don't have to look at the camera.
Oh. So anyways, agricultural lime has calcium and magnesium, so you really have to go ahead and make sure that you have that well worked into, especially the root zone for your tomatoes. That is really, really important. I always also like to say, if you're going to go ahead and plant the same type of plants in the same area, you always should add a good amount of, like 2 to 3 inches of compost, and work that into the soil too, because anytime you're growing the same plants in the same garden, you could be building up insects or diseases of those plants. So by adding compost, that helps sometimes keep some of the root diseases down. That was a good question.
Okay. What causes leaves to become pale?
Pale means that they don't have enough nutrients. And so pale green, usually not enough nitrogen. And that's very common with plants that are growing very, very fast. Also, if it's a plant that is not getting enough sun and is a sun-loving plant, then it can be much more pale. Like for instance, these petunias right here that I have in front of me are a nice, dark, rich green. And they love full sun. And they will thrive with this. But if I put this in the shade, they would start to pale out, and you don't want that. When you're working with plants, sometimes it's good to go ahead and fertilize them just in the springtime, but I like, especially for instance, for any kind of vegetable, and sometimes flowers too that bloom, annual flowers that bloom all through the springtime and summer and fall, I like to go ahead and use a slow release fertilizer so they can get nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium all through the growing season. Now, perennials, you don't want to fertilize them in the springtime. They're not geared for that. They have already gone ahead and pulled all the nutrients that they needed from the ground last fall, and they've gone ahead and collected all the different things and turned it into what they have. They have like little computer brains, and I think that they have computer brains in the roots. And the computer roots say, okay, I'm going to send this up to make more leaves, this up to make flowers, this up to make better stems, stronger stems. And if you add fertilizer to herbaceous perennial plants, that's going to give them too much nitrogen and too much. So they're going to go, well, I had this all planned, but I've got to grow. And then they get kind of weepy and floppy, and nah, it's hard on them. It's hard on them.
All right. I'm sorry if I butcher these plant names, but Ginny, can you split anthurium just like you can hostas?
Oh, okay. Anthurium.
Anthurium.
Okay. Yeah, I think you could. What you'd want to do is in the early spring, before the leaves come out, we've already passed that, or this fall, what you want to do is you want to dig it up very, very carefully, and then you want to take a look at the way the roots are. Most plants, if they've been in the ground for 3 to 5 years, especially herbaceous perennials like that, what's going to happen is that they will go ahead and start growing outwards. And you might actually have a center part that's totally bare. It's not dead, it's just the plants have moved out. They just kind of spread out like that. So you can go ahead and dig it up and then separate them, add some compost to the soil, mix it into your soil, and then replant what you have. Life is good. You can always share your plants with friends too.
Yeah, so talk about propagation. How do you propagate?
Okay, well, it just depends. A plant like a petunia like this, the only way you can propagate this is through seed. And these are ones that you have to buy. You can't go ahead and do that. But with this one, sometimes you can take some stems and put the stems in some potting mixture to let them continue to grow too. So you can do stem cuttings, you can do seeds. The other way you can do propagation is like for instance, on things like daylilies, they have really cool roots. And you can go ahead and pull the plant up and just take a couple of the roots off and put the roots into potting soil and keep them evenly moist. And you will get the same plant. It will take a little bit of time for it to grow, but it will. Now, the way people get a zillion plants really, really quickly is they do something called tissue culture. That is the coolest thing in the world. I was talking with a gentleman who, this is in '08 when, remember everything kind of fell apart for a while, the bubble fell and people were losing their jobs. and he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to keep his job. So he thought, I'm going to go ahead and create a job myself. He turned part of his basement into this laboratory, and part of it was very, very sterile. So with tissue culture, you have to have an agar, which is kind of like a jelly substance, like, well, almost more like a broth. And he went ahead and scooped off little teeny pieces of the growing tip of the hosta. And then he was able to go ahead and separate that into cells. And that growing tip is totally undifferent. It doesn't have like, I'm going to be a leaf or a stem or a flower. It's just sitting there waiting to decide what it's going to be. And so he went ahead and planted all those out, and then he went from one hosta to hundreds of hosta of the same type. So that's how people really do a lot of new propagation, which is really fun. Okay, so we're going to take a break right now and keep those questions coming. Love it. Take care. Hi there. Okay, hopefully somebody else would like to ask me some fun questions. Once again, I'm at the Salisbury University greenhouse, and this is a fabulous place. What they do is they go ahead, last summer, they looked at what they were doing, what worked, what didn't work. But most of all, they also thought, well, what if we did this instead? And then through the winter, they go ahead and go through all of the seed catalogs with their creative genius and coming up with different combinations of plants that can go together, and also where they would be growing. And then they order everything, and then they know when they have to sow the seeds, and once they get the seeds sown or they get the plugs, then they can plant them out. What they're doing also, they're keeping them in this greenhouse until after Mother's Day. And you're asking me, why would you do that? I mean, there are other greenhouses that are already empty because people have gone ahead and gotten all the plants out of the greenhouses. Well, I'm one of those people that I went shopping about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I'm thrilled with what I bought, but I am bringing them out into the sun during the day, and then I put them back into a sheltered place, my house, in the evening. Now, I left them in the house yesterday because, I don't know about you guys, but we had gale force winds yesterday, and anything delicate would have been just desiccated. So what I do is I leave them outside if it's nice. I bring them back in at night. At night it might have been cold. But what they want to do is they want to make sure they only buy enough for what they need, with maybe 1 or 2. And so they wait until after Mother's Day. That is when the last frost date in this part of Maryland is. You can guarantee, with your fingers crossed, that you won't have any more frost after this week. Okay? So if you have any questions, I'm ready. Oh, she has a question.
Yes, I have 2.
Okay.
Janet Beater says, how far apart should you plant coleus plants? Would they do okay with morning shade but full afternoon sun?
Okay, coleus plants are really cool. You can have sun coleus, which can handle morning shade and afternoon sun. And you can have the old-fashioned coleus that needs the morning sun and the afternoon shade. So when you're looking for a coleus plant that does that, you want to make sure that you have the right one, the one that can handle the sun. How far apart should you plant them? It depends. Some plants are very, very small and tight and compact, while the other coleus get very large. How do you know? Well, okay, that's what they make these awesome plant tags for. So you get the tag and you read them, and like for instance, this one right here is called Cantalina gilded grape. So this is not obviously not a coleus, but it tells you the habit, the blooming time, how tall it is. This one is like 8 to 16 inches, and it can get to be 20 to 40 inches wide. So it tells you that this is a spreader. So when you're going to go ahead and look at that type of plant that you're buying as a coleus, check to see is it one of those small compact ones or one of the larger ones. I grow coleus in like a 3-gallon container rather than in a garden because they like to be moist, and I have real sandy, dry soil. So I can go ahead and put mine in containers that I keep really good care of and make sure that they get watered when they need to get watered. Is there another question?
Right.
She's checking.
Where are some good places on the lower shore to get windowsill plants for apartments besides?
There are wonderful garden centers all up and down the whole Delmarva Peninsula. I I could just whip them off for you guys right now, but sometimes I think it's fun to go ahead and check. You know, you could check online, but you can also talk to your friends who are gardeners. There's some beautiful ones in Delaware, absolutely gorgeous ones on the Delmarva Eastern Shore in Maryland, and there's some beautiful ones even on the Eastern Shore of Virginia. Each one specializes in presenting things a little differently, but they're all really, really good. And don't forget, you know, we do have the box stores. I don't always say them for the first. I like to support the local people first, and the box stores are fine, but I would go first to a garden center. And remember, there's farm markets also. So if you have like a farm market, you should take a look at that because they're often grown by the farmer and he's selling his own plants. So he knows what's going on with those things, or she knows what's going on. So this is the perfect time of year to start looking at those garden farm stores. Yes.
Okay,
Beautiful.
what fertilizer do you recommend for indoor plants?
Okay, for indoor plants, I like to go ahead and use either a slow release or I like to use a liquid fertilizer, but because these are tropical plants and I don't want them to grow really, really fast, I'm basically bonsaiing a lot of my tropical plants by keeping the roots small, and I do go ahead and repot them every couple of years. Sometimes I cut the roots in thirds and I go ahead and put them back into the same pot that I've washed with new potting soil just to keep them to the size that I want. At that point, when I use fertilizer, it is a balanced fertilizer with equal amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or like a 5-10-10, which would be a little bit less nitrogen, more phosphorus, more potassium if they're bloomers. If they're just a tropical, just an even like a 5-5-5 or a 10-10-10. But I reduce the amount. I reduce the amount in the summer to maybe about half. And I only water them with a fertilizer maybe once a month. In the wintertime, it depends. Like for instance, I have African violets. They like to bloom more in the winter. And I have some orchids that are blooming right now too. So I would give them a little bit more fertilizer with a balanced 10-10-10. It just depends whether they're blooming or not. Good question.
All right. Do you know if there are any outdoor plants or bushes that are nature's snake deterrents?
Oh my goodness. You know, snakes are part of our environment, and actually they're very helpful. They eat crickets. They eat a lot of the different bugs that you don't want. They sometimes go after little voles and mice. So to me, having a snake is not a bad thing. And to be honest with you, snakes don't want to be around people. So if they see you, they're more inclined to just get out of town rather than be anywhere near you. So there's really nothing you can plant that will say, no, don't be a snake here. But if you're concerned, like for instance, if you have a shady area and you want to do a ground cover, you might want to do a ground cover of something like the heuchera, which is coral bells, or maybe the Lenten roses that have the leaves are more upright rather than hossa, which are very, very dense. So it just depends on what you're planting. Good question.
You're doing great, Jenny. It's hot in this greenhouse for everyone who doesn't know.
Oh,
All right.
greenhouses are always warm.
Yes. I'm not usually in a greenhouse. You are. You're used to
Yes.
it.
And that's why we have the fans on too, to keep
Yes.
the moisture going.
Yes. All right. So how do you water plants in self-watering planters?
Oh, I love that. No, that's perfect. I actually have a beautiful self-watering planter for my tomatoes outside. And so what I do is I always start with new potting soil, but they always have like a tray underneath. So, and a pipe that you can go ahead and add water if you want to. So what I do is I water every day on top. But like for instance, if I know I'm going to be too busy the next day, that morning I will go ahead and fill up the, through the pipe, I will go ahead and fill up the tray that's underneath it. And there's always an overflow. So as soon as you see the water flowing out, you know that you've got it full enough. And the roots of the plant will go ahead, will be able to pull up that water without you having to water them that day or even the day after. So basically, just knowing your plants, knowing how it works is the best way to do it.
Because I had a watering planter, and every time it would rain,
Uh-huh.
I feel like it would overwater it.
It would seem that way. It would, yes. So what you have to do is, if it rains, you realize you don't need to be watering it that time yourself. And if you know we're going to have rain, just kind of like water it a little bit. Always water early in the morning. And if it's going to rain in the afternoon, you don't have to water the next morning. Also, it's really good. I know people say, well, why should I have a rain gauge? If you have a rain gauge, at least you know how much water Mother Nature is giving your plants. So you know, should you water your plants more or not? And again, the easiest way to do it is dig into the soil about an inch down to see how dry it is down below that first inch of soil.
All right. So that goes into the next question.
Okay.
Do I really need the soil moisture meter?
Oh, a soil moisture meter. That's kind of a fun thing. I would say if you have one, I would use it. And if you use it though, you want to kind of keep an eye on it. Maybe even make a graph of, okay, this week you went ahead and tested it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and this is how the moisture was. So you could go ahead and say, if it was overcast, I noticed that I didn't need to water as much, but if it was bright sunny, you need to water more. And it just helps you figure out how your plants need water, because every plant needs water a little bit differently. Just like when you think about it, somebody who is an athlete who's running an awful lot, they need a lot more water than somebody who's just sitting in an office quietly, although they should be drinking water too, but they don't need as much, if it makes sense.
Okay. Can you always save a plant? How do I know when it is too far gone?
Oh, saving a plant. It depends. If the plant roots are okay, then you can probably save the plant, because you can prune off the top. You just sort of want to take a look at the roots, and sometimes you just really have to take the plant out of the pot, take the soil off the roots, and take a good look at the plant. Even if it's an annual, perennial, or you know, a house plant, you want to go ahead and take a look at the roots. And if the roots look okay, then new potting soil, and cut off all what's dead or ucky, and try to figure out whether you had it where it was maybe too much light or not enough light. If the roots are gone and the plant top is okay, you can go ahead and take a bit of the top and put it in a water and see if it will form roots, but that would be it. Good question.
Is there any part of the greenhouse that you want to talk about these plants?
Oh my goodness,
I know
love.
you have a favorite plant somewhere. I like the
tell you,
Mexican grass over there.
let's go ahead and wander around the greenhouse and take a look, see what we have, okay? So. Oh, over here?
Over here now.
What I love about this is that, look how it moves. Isn't that cool? So in the wind, it's always going to give you motion in the garden, which is really cool. This is really lovely. So when you're picking out plants, you want to kind of choose the ones that you like for what they're going to do. Where does a grass plant like to live? Well, these guys need full sun. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now here's some coleus. We were talking about coleus. These guys are obviously going to be absolutely huge. So I would want to find out what type they were, to find out, do these need full sun or do they need shade? These are being grown right now in the full sun part. So I would imagine that this one right here and all the ones beside are the sun lovers, because they're in the sun area, which is really cool. So there's so many things that they're so beautiful here. Let's go over here to the cactus just for fun. Now, I'm not necessarily a fan of cactus, but succulents are really, really popular. And these right here are amazing. If you touch these, you notice that they have little teeny spines on them. So you have to be careful. But as a succulent, you water them once. You can put this in a really, really dry location and not water them at all for a long, long time. Cactuses like these guys over here, always be careful and wear personal protective equipment when you're when you're around cactuses like this, because you don't want to get those little thorns stuck into you. If you do, you want to use like maybe a Scotch tape and pull them out with a Scotch tape. They're kind of cool. Behind them, they have a whole bunch of hens and chickens. They're really cool too. Let's go over and take a look at some more plants over here. Oh, sorry. I'm going to go over to the other side of the greenhouse. Oh, okay, we're going to take a break. Sorry.
How often do I water my succulents?
Okay, the question is, how often should you water succulents? That's a very smart question, because succulents are not like, say, this beautiful, beautiful plant right here. Oh, I love this guy. This is a salvia, and it has gorgeous blue flowers on it. This loves sun. This one likes to be watered every day. Succulents on their own are very, very heavy leaf plants, and they actually absorb water like a sponge. They're used to being in the desert, so they need to be in full sun, and you need to water them maybe once a week. The easiest way to kill succulents is to overwater them. You don't want to overwater them. That's the important thing. Make sure they get full sun, and they're happy campers.
Next question.
Another question.
Alrighty. Why are my plants wilting and drooping?
Why are the plants wilting and drooping? Well, anytime you have a plant that's wilting and drooping, you have to look at the soil, because the soil will give you the answer. If you look at the soil and you touch it, or you take the plant out of the pot and you feel the soil and it's really, really dry, they're wilting and drooping because the soil's too dry. The roots do not have moisture, and they cannot go ahead and pull the moisture up to the foliage. On the other hand, if you take the plant out of the pot, I'm going to do this. Okay. Beautiful. And I look at the roots on this, and if the soil is sopping wet, that means that the roots are actually rotting. They're drowning. They're drowning in water. And like any living thing that drowns, it starts to die. So if it's too dry, it's easy, you water it. If it's too wet, it's not that difficult, you let it dry out. And then gradually go ahead, after it's had a chance to dry out, give it a little bit of water. But this will give you an idea of how much water you should or shouldn't have. The other thing is like, for instance, if it's an outdoor plant and it's really close to like a sprinkler system, and it's wilting, and it's because it's got too much water, you might want to actually dig that plant up and move it somewhere else, or move the sprinkler head. It just depends on what type of irrigation system you have. Another question? Oh, she's got more questions. This is good. You guys are being very kind.
Does singing to your plants or playing music to them actually help them grow?
So the question is, should you play music to your plants, and does that help to make them grow? They have done studies on that, and I think it's really cool. I think that the soft music, like soft rock and all that kind of stuff, that's very, very mellow, and plants really do respond to music like that. But then again, if that's not your thing and you want to listen to something else, well then play the music that you like and see if your plants like it. But I do know that plants, like almost everything in this world, responds to sounds. And if the music's good, go for it.
All right. What plants should I miss the leaves of? Or
Okay, the question is, should you miss the leaves of plants, and if so, which ones? Okay, the first one is, if the plant leaves are fuzzy, like say an African violet, never, ever miss those leaves, because the African violet is designed to have all those hairs, fuzzy leaves like that, to keep the sun from burning it. But it also collects moisture, and it would rot the plant. So you don't want to do that. So I would say ferns would be the ones that I would miss. The delicate ferns, like, there's some beautiful indoor ferns that are really, really good. And then outside ferns would love to have a little bit of water on top, because they prefer to be in shady spaces, moist, shady spaces. I live in an area where it has real dry, sandy soil. I planted a whole bunch of trees. I have shade, but I still have that real sandy soil, that really dry, sandy soil. So I have dry, sandy, shady soil now. So if I ever decided to grow ferns, I would have to be out there watering it and missing it daily, which is why I don't grow ferns in that part of the garden. I put them in a container, and I water the container once or twice a week. Good question. While she's looking up that, I just wanted to share some of the beautiful plants that I have back here. These are lantana. Now, lantana, a little further south, actually survive. They survive in what they call Zone 8. We are in Maryland, Zone 7. We're 7B. Now, Crisfield is 8, and I think Ocean City is an 8, but for the most part, most of the peninsula is Zone 7, 7B. So these guys are only summer lovers, but They have a funky smell, but they come in beautiful colors. Here's a bright yellow one that I truly love. And then there's this gorgeous one that has all shades of reds and oranges together. This is one of my favorites because it's a multiple of colors. But the reason why I love these are perfect for pollinators. And it doesn't matter whether they're butterflies or little, there's little flies that are called sweat bees, and they're good pollinators. And even the bumblebees and the honeybees, when they're working the flowers, they don't bother people. So even if you're afraid of bees, don't worry if you have these things, because they're going to be more interested in the flowers and they're not paying attention to you. But what's nice about this is that this is a bouquet of flowers. So the pollinator can fly over here and land here and have a whole smorgasbord or buffet without having to work at it. They're right there and they can just enjoy it. Over further, there's a really pretty bright pink one too. So I think that lantanas in the summertime will give you so much color all through the summer. Absolutely beautiful. I bet you have another question. Yeah. Okay.
So what plants do I use if I have a lot of sun in my house?
Okay, what plants do you use if you have a lot of sun in your house? Wow. Any kind of leaf that's very thick, I would say like a jade plant, thrives in full sun. The first time I went to California, I was in Southern California, and there was this guy who was taking electric hedge shears to a hedge of jade plants, and the hedge was 5 feet tall. I was blown away. But jade plants need a lot of sun. They're succulents. So if you have any succulents at home, they need to have full sun. I also think things like the Ficus benjamina, the weeping fig, and that does much, much better if it has full sun. So think in terms of if it has a thick leaf or a very thick sort of, I guess, surface of the leaf, that means that it can handle full sun. Good question.
So Jen wants to know, how do you handle different types of fungus on maple and oak trees?
Okay, how do you handle different types of fungus on maple and oak leaves? Trees. Okay, so it depends on what you're talking about. Maple trees will get a type of fungus, but it's more inside the bark or inside the trunk, and it kills the plant from the top, or from the inside out. And there's nothing you can do about that. Most of the time, the plant doesn't have really a lot of problems, either oaks or maples. So I really wouldn't worry about it. What I would do is I would just see, check to see how bad it is. Let me put it this way. When you're dealing with a plant, you want to use integrated pest management. So first of all, you have to identify what the problem is. You say you have a fungus on a maple or an oak. Okay, first of all, you need to find out what that fungus is. And then you have to decide how much of the tree is affected. If just 1 or 2 leaves are affected, no big deal. If a lot of the plant is affected, that's more of a big deal. There's plants that get powdery mildew. That would be like the old-fashioned crepe myrtles get powdery mildew. Lilacs get powdery mildew, that sort of thing. And if you have a plant that has that, and even dogwoods can get powdery mildew. So if you have a plant like that, you have to think about where you could plant it so that it wouldn't get the powdery mildew as much, or maybe get a variety that is more powdery mildew resistant. Like for instance, the newer crepe myrtles that have all the Indian names that were designed by Don Eagleff at the National Arboretum, all have Indian names, and they have all been bred to be more powdery mildew resistant. And then the ones that are also like the pink velour and all those varieties made are also more, they have a thicker leaf and are much, much more powdery mildew resistant. I don't know if that totally answered your question, but I hope it gives you an idea of what to do. Oh, okay, we're going to take a break. Thank you so much for joining us here. We are at the Salisbury University greenhouse, which is just full of beautiful plants. And in another week, you will see all of these beautiful plants planted on the grounds. The other cool thing about Salisbury University, the entire campus is an arboretum. So you can go ahead online and see what is that tree, and they will tell you what that tree is. I just have to share a couple more plants with you here because there's so many beautiful ones here. I've shared a lot with you guys, but I just want to share how you can do color combinations. Like this is a beautiful mist plant that I just love, an arboretum. And this is a beautiful, this is the Persian shield. Now, these wouldn't necessarily be planted together, but if you put the two of them together, don't they look awesome? On the other hand, if I take the Persian shield and I pair it with this gorgeous bright yellow, look at how that really pops. So when you're planting plants together on your own, one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that you want all the sun-loving plants in the same area. And you want all the shade-loving plants in the same area. You can go ahead and put combinations together like crazy, but if these plants don't like it in the sun, or they don't like the type of soil, they're not going to be happy, and you're not going to be happy. So enjoy your plants, do a little research, have fun, and enjoy your day. Thank you for joining us.